I never thought I'd see the day my own daughter would look me in the eye and treat me like a stranger. After taking thousands from my bank account, I'd raised her on my own, carried her through nights when I couldn't even afford dinner for myself. And yet, the last time we spoke, she didn't explain, didn't apologize. She just stared at me, blocked my number, and left me standing there in silence. That moment, it still feels like a hole in my chest. If you've ever felt something similar, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It was a Tuesday morning when I first noticed it. Nothing dramatic, no flashing warning on my phone, just a small notification from the bank. Withdrawal of $240 completed. I sat there in my kitchen, holding my coffee, staring at the screen. My pension isn't much, just enough to get me through the month if I'm careful. I knew every dollar that went in and every dollar that went out. I don't spend on much. Food, bills, maybe a paperback from the thrift store once in a while. So, seeing $240 gone without me touching it, it made my stomach tighten. At first I told myself it must be a banking mistake. Those happen. Maybe a double charge or some automatic payment I'd forgotten about. I tried not to think about it. But the next morning there was another one, a little more this time. By Friday I'd seen 3 of them, all to the same account number. And that's when the worry started to crawl in. I'm not a man who likes to overreact. I've lived long enough to know that most problems aren't as big as they first seem, but when you're living on a fixed income, every cent matters. I decided to go to the branch that afternoon. It's only a 15-minute walk from my place. The air was cold, the kind that makes you keep your hands buried deep in your pockets. I remember the wind tugging at my coat as I crossed the street, and the way the bell ebbed. I thought about when she was little, how she'd run into the house after school, toss her bag on the couch, and dig into the fridge like she owned the place. Which she did. She owned every corner of my world back then. I'd worked extra shifts to keep the lights on, skipped dinners so she could have seconds. And now, here I was, wondering why she couldn't even pick up the phone before taking money that wasn't hers. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking my account every hour, as if watching would stop the numbers from changing. The next morning, there it was again. Another withdrawal. I sat with my coffee, staring at the numbers on my phone until the screen dimmed. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always come with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with a text alert from your bank. If you've ever felt something similar, if you've ever been blindsided by someone you thought you could trust, I'd like you to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe. You never know who might need to hear your story too. That day, I didn't call her right away. I told myself I needed more information, that maybe there was some explanation I wasn't seeing yet. But the truth, I was afraid of hearing her voice and knowing, really knowing, that she'd done this without regret. The next few days, I moved through my routine like a man underwater. I bought groceries, I paid the electricity bill, I nodded to neighbors. But inside there was this constant low hum of dread. It wasn't just about the money, it was about what it meant. I've lived long enough to know that money can be replaced. But trust, once that's gone, it doesn't grow back the same way. On the 4th day, I took the folded statement out of my coat pocket again. The creases had worn deep into the paper. I kept looking at her name, thinking about how many times I'd written it, on birthday cards, and school forms, on the cover of her first passport. Now it was here, beside a list of withdrawals that felt like tiny cuts I hadn't seen until they bled me dry. I told myself I'd call her tomorrow. Tomorrow came, and I found another withdrawal instead. That was when something in me shifted. The confusion was still there, but it had company now. A quiet, solid weight of hurt that wouldn't go away. I closed my laptop, sat back, and let the silence fill the room. In that stillness, I realized this wasn't just about numbers on a page. This was about something that had been eroding between us for a long time. I just hadn't wanted to see it. On the walk back from the bank that day, I kept my hands shoved deep in my coat pockets, not because of the cold, but because I didn't trust them to stay steady. My head was heavy, my steps slow. I live in a small town, the kind where you can cross the main street in 3 minutes and still hear the creak of the same flagpole outside the post office you've been hearing for decades. But I barely noticed any of it. My mind wasn't on the cracked sidewalks or the faint smell of coffee drifting from the diner. It was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about how we got here, me and her. When her mother left, she was only 8. I remember the way her small hand gripped mine so tightly that first night, as if she thought I might vanish too. I didn't. I couldn't. Every decision I made from that moment forward was about her. I learned to braid hair, poorly at first, because she didn't like when it was tangled at school. I learned how to make pancakes without a recipe because Saturday mornings needed to feel special, even if the week had been hard. I still remember the first birthday cake I baked from scratch. The frosting was uneven, the edges a little burnt, but she beamed at me like I'd just built her a castle. Those years weren't easy. I worked extra shifts. There were times when dinner for me was just a cup of tea so she could have a proper meal. I never told her that. I never wanted her to know. And yet, for all the struggles, there was joy too. She'd run into the house after school, dump her backpack in the hallway, and launch into a story before I even had my coat off. We had inside jokes that no one else could follow, routines that were ours alone. She leaned on me for everything, and I didn't mind. I liked it. Back then, I was her whole world, and she was mine. But somewhere along the line, something shifted. It wasn't sudden. There was no big argument, no slammed doors or shouting. It was more like a slow fade, the kind you don't notice until the picture is almost gone. She grew up, as she should, got her license, moved in with friends, then into her own place. I thought our bond was strong enough to survive the distance. I told myself this was just what happens when children become adults. They don't need you as much. At first it was still good. She'd come over for dinner once a week. We'd watch those crime shows she liked, the ones where I could guess the ending too early and she'd roll her eyes at me. She'd call when she needed advice about her car or when a recipe didn't turn out right. But slowly, those dinners became less frequent. The calls got shorter. Sometimes I'd go weeks without hearing from her. I told myself she was busy. Work, friends, maybe a relationship she wasn't ready to talk about yet. I didn't push. I wanted her to know I trusted her to live her life. Still, every now and then, I'd feel it, that ache in my chest when I realized I was learning about her life through other people. A neighbor would mention they saw her in town. A mutual friend would say she was at some gathering I hadn't even known about. I kept thinking, she'll come back around. Relationships have seasons. Maybe we were in a quieter one, but I never imagined, never in my worst thoughts, that she would see me as someone to take from, rather than someone to protect. On that walk home, I kept turning it over in my mind. When had I stopped being Dad and started being whatever I was now? I remembered a day about a year ago when she came over looking tired. She didn't ask for anything, but I slipped her $50 before she left. She smiled, hugged me, said, "You're the best." I thought it was a moment of closeness. Now, looking back, I wonder if it was the start of something else. The first time she realized I wouldn't question it. The more I thought about it, the more memories shifted in my mind. A couple of small loans she never repaid. Times when she'd call, not to talk, but to ask if I could cover a bill just until payday. I'd never said no, not once. And maybe, without realizing it, I'd taught her that I was always an open door. That thought sat in my stomach like a stone. I stopped by the little park before reaching my street. It's not much, just a bench and a few trees. But I needed to sit. The air had that damp chill that seeps into your bones if you stay still too long. I pulled out the bank statement again. Her name glared back at me, neat and printed, so official and cold. I could almost hear her as a little girl tugging on my sleeve. "Daddy, look at me." And I always did. No matter how tired I was, no matter what was going on, I looked. She was my reason for everything. Now I was looking at her name in a place I never wanted to see it, and I didn't know what to do with that. I sat there for a long time, watching the wind push a few dead leaves across the path. When I finally stood and started walking again, my street felt different. The same houses, the same cracked pavement, but the distance between my home and hers had never felt so wide. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, soup from a can, and ate it without tasting it. I kept thinking about all the times I'd pictured her future. I'd imagined walking her down the aisle someday, holding my grandchild, being the person she called when she needed advice. Those dreams felt a little foolish now. I went to bed early, but the quiet of the house pressed in on me. Lying there, I thought about how much life can change without you realizing it. You think you're building something unbreakable, and then, one day, you're holding the pieces, wondering when the cracks first appeared. That's how we got here. Not with one big betrayal, but with 100 small moments I didn't see for what they were. And the worst part? Even now, even knowing what I know, I still wanted to believe there was some misunderstanding. I called her that evening. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table for an hour, maybe more, turning my phone over in my hand like it was some heavy thing I wasn't sure I wanted to pick up. I'd made myself a cup of tea, let it go cold, and still hadn't taken a sip. My voice was steady when she finally answered, but my chest felt tight enough to crack. 3 rings. That's all it took. She didn't sound surprised to hear from me, just flat. I didn't start with small talk. I asked her about the withdrawals. There was a pause, just long enough for me to think maybe she hadn't heard me right. Then she sighed. It wasn't the kind of sigh you give when you're sorry. It was the kind that says you're an inconvenience. I needed it, Dad. I'll pay you back, she said. No warmth. No hint that she understood what she'd done. I told her as calmly as I could that I wasn't angry. I said I was hurt, and I was, more than I could explain in a few words over the phone, but she brushed it off, said she was busy, and hung up. I just sat there, the phone fell in my hand. The television in front of me was black, my own faint reflection staring back. It was in that stillness I felt it. A shift. That was the moment I realized I wasn't someone she respected anymore. Maybe not even someone she truly saw. I don't know if you've ever had someone you love speak to you like you're just a problem they have to manage. It's a quiet kind of pain. It doesn't make you want to shout. It makes you want to go very still, because if you move too quickly, you're afraid the truth will catch up to you. I sat there, thinking back to all the times we'd talked before. The late-night calls when she was away at college, crying about a grade, or a fight with a friend. The times she'd ask for my advice about work, about rent, about life. Back then, she listened. Back then, my words mattered. And now she couldn't give me more than 30 seconds. If you've ever had something like this happen, if you've had that one moment where you realize the ground between you and your child has shifted, you'll understand why it feels like losing a part of yourself. And before I go on, if you've ever been through anything like this, or if you've ever had a relationship you thought was unbreakable start to crack, I hope you'll take a moment to like this video, maybe subscribe, and share your own story in the comments. Because the truth is, stories like mine happen quietly, and far more often than we talk about. After she hung up, I thought about calling her back, but I didn't. I told myself maybe she really was busy, maybe she'd call later, but deep down, I think I knew she wouldn't. I kept hearing her tone in my head, not the words, but the way they were said, like I was asking for something unreasonable when all I wanted was an answer, when all I wanted was for her to care. I set the phone down on the table and stared at her. The tea I'd made hours earlier, it had gone completely cold. I picked it up anyway, took a sip, and almost laughed at the bitterness. It felt like the right taste for that night. I didn't sleep well. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many times over the years I'd gone without, just so she wouldn't have to. It wasn't about money. It was about the principle. I had always told her, if you need something, you come to me, you ask. We'll figure it out together. She hadn't asked. She'd just taken. And maybe that's what cut deepest. Not the amount, not the inconvenience, but the way it stripped away the respect between us. In the morning I made breakfast out of habit. 2 eggs, toast, black coffee, but I couldn't finish it. Every time I lifted the fork, I remembered her sigh, that small, sharp sound that told me more than her words ever could. I kept wondering, had she been doing this for a while? Had she looked at my account, seen the balance, and thought, he won't miss it? Or worse, had she thought, he doesn't need it as much as I do? Either way, it meant she'd stopped seeing me as her father in the way I'd always been, not someone to turn to, but someone to take from. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. That's what parents do, isn't it? We forgive, even before the apology comes. But I couldn't ignore how quickly she'd hung up, how easily she'd closed that door in my face. I think that was when I first felt the quiet kind of betrayal that doesn't scream. It just sits with you. It eats at you slowly, like rust on metal. The rest of the day I moved around the house in silence. I washed the dishes, folded the laundry, swept the floor. All the while, her voice stayed in my head. "I needed it, Dad. I'll pay you back." Like a promise she didn't mean. Like a script she'd said before, maybe to someone else. I didn't want to think of my daughter that way. But it's strange. Once the seed of doubt is planted, you can't control how it grows. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about who she was becoming, and who I was to her now. I used to be the person she trusted most. Now I felt like a bank she didn't think twice about robbing. I sat in my armchair that evening, hands clasped, watching the light fade from the window, and I asked myself a question I'd never imagined I'd ask. When did my daughter stop loving me the way I love her? I didn't have an answer. And maybe that was the hardest part. Weeks went by, but the withdrawals didn't stop. Even though she said she'd pay me back, I didn't see a single cent come back into my account. At first, I tried to convince myself it was temporary. Maybe she really was struggling. Maybe she'd forgotten. Maybe she was waiting for a paycheck. I wanted to believe that, because believing the worst felt unbearable. But then another notification came, and another. It was like watching water drip slowly from a faucet into an empty bucket. Each drip invisible alone, but together they fill up the whole space, leaving nothing behind. I started keeping some cash at home. I put it in an envelope, tucked away in a drawer in my bedroom. It wasn't much, just a little cushion for emergencies, something I could reach for without feeling the sting of another withdrawal. But even that didn't ease the pain. Each time I checked my bank balance and saw another withdrawal, I felt smaller, less like a father, more like an ATM she could access whenever she wanted, without asking. I'd sit at the kitchen table, the envelope of cash beside my empty cup, and stare at the numbers on my phone. Sometimes the withdrawals were small, $100 or so. Other times, they were larger. It didn't matter. Each one chipped away at something deeper than money. Trust, respect, the bond we once had. I started losing sleep. At night my mind would replay the moments I thought mattered the most. The birthdays, the scraped knees I bandaged, the late nights when I stayed up waiting for her to come home. And I wondered how it came to this. How she'd become someone who took from me in silence instead of talking. I stopped answering my phone when friends called to check in. I didn't want to explain why I was so tired all the time, or why I seemed distant. I didn't want to say, my daughter is stealing from me. It's hard to explain something that feels so small, yet hurts so deeply. There was no shouting, no confrontations, no dramatic moments where I could scream or cry out my pain, just a slow, quiet erosion. The kind that wears you down bit by bit until you barely recognize yourself. One afternoon, I sat in my favorite chair by the window. The sunlight was soft, filtering through the curtains, casting faint patterns on the floor. Outside, a few kids played down the street, their laughter sharp and clear. I looked down at the envelope in my lap, my small stash of safety, and felt an ache that had nothing to do with money. I realized I was guarding something far more fragile than cash. I was trying to protect what was left of a relationship slipping through my fingers. There were nights I wanted to call her again, to ask her why, to tell her how much it hurt that she didn't even have the courage to talk to me properly. But every time the phone rang in my hand, I'd lose the nerve. It wasn't just fear of rejection, it was the slow burn of disappointment that made me question what she really thought of me. I kept asking myself, was I still her father, or just someone she took for granted? I didn't want to believe the latter, but the silence and the missing money said otherwise. Some days I felt like I was walking through a fog, going through the motions of it. Daily life without really living. I'd wake up, make a cup of coffee and check my phone, see the balance, feel the loss, and then try to push it down until the next time. One evening, I was sitting alone after dinner, the house quiet, except for the ticking clock on the wall. I thought about calling her one more time, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I put the phone down and closed my eyes. I thought about the daughter I raised, the little girl who used to look up at me with so much trust, the one who believed I was her rock, her protector. And I wondered if, somewhere along the way, I had failed her. Because if I hadn't, why would she feel she needed to take from me instead of come to me? That question stayed with me long after the room fell dark. That morning began like any other, or at least it tried to. I woke up, the early light filtering through the curtains, the usual quiet filling the room. I reached for my phone out of habit, checked the notifications, and then, there it was again. Another transfer. Only this time, it wasn't just a small sum. It was over $1,000. I sat down at the kitchen table, the cold coffee forgotten in my hand, and stared at the screen like it was some cruel joke. Not just money, not just numbers disappearing into thin air, but pieces of something much harder to see, the last threads holding us together. It was gone. I wasn't just losing my savings anymore. I was losing her. I called her that day, not with anger, not with accusations, just a tired voice, asking for an explanation. But she didn't pick up. I left a message, careful with my words, trying to reach whatever part of her might still care. Then I sent a text. I told her it had to stop. I waited. Minutes passed, and then I saw it. Those 3 words that slammed into me harder than anything else ever had. Don't contact me. I sat there, phone trem, bling in my hand. I read those words over and over, each time feeling the weight of every letter sinking deeper. Don't contact me, like I was a stranger, like I was nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting, because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about love, about the space where a father and daughter should have met, and that space was empty. I thought about the years before this moment, the birthday cakes, the scraped knees, the laughter we shared. How did it all slip away without a single fight, without a word? I realized then, maybe it wasn't a slow fade anymore. Maybe this was the end of the road. I sat at that table for hours, feeling a loneliness so sharp it almost felt physical. I wasn't sure if I was angry or just broken. I was both. But most of all, I was tired. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of losing pieces of the daughter I thought I knew. If you've ever had that moment, where everything you believed in suddenly feels fragile, or even gone, you know how heavy the silence can be. Before I close this chapter, I want to say something to anyone listening who might feel the same pain. You're not alone. If this story touches you, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes just knowing someone else understands is a small step toward healing. The day I saw her again, I wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Weeks had passed since I'd sent that last message, weeks filled with silence. I wasn't expecting to run into her, of all places, in the middle of town. She was walking down the sidewalk, surrounded by friends, laughing. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in a long time. There was a lightness in her step, a freedom in the way she moved, something I hadn't seen for years. I thought maybe, just maybe, if I caught her alone, if I could get her away from the crowd, I might be able to speak to her, to reach through whatever wall had built up between us. I started walking toward her, heart pounding quietly in my chest. But before I could say a word, she saw me. Her eyes met mine, and everything changed in that instant. Not with guilt, not with sadness, but with irritation. "Dad, not now," she said flatly, her voice sharp and distant. I wanted to tell her I wasn't there to argue. I wanted to say I missed her, that I was still her father, but the words caught in my throat. She turned her back on me, right there in front of her friends, and walked away. That was the last time I ever saw her face up close. I stood there, frozen, watching her disappear down the street. It wasn't just the rejection that stung. It was the ease with which she dismissed me, like I was an annoyance she had no time for. I wanted to call after her, to beg for just a moment, but my feet felt glued to the pavement. And so I stood there, alone among the bustling crowd, feeling more invisible than ever. Later, when I sat down in my empty living room, I replayed the moment over and over. Her laughter with her friends, the way she looked so carefree, and me, just a stranger she wanted to avoid. I kept wondering if she realized what she was walking away from, if she understood how deeply her words had cut, or if she even cared. If you've ever faced something like this, that quiet, final breaking of a bond you thought was unbreakable, you know how heavy silence can be, how it fills the space where love used to live. Before I move on to the next part of this story, if this touches you in any way, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more, and share your thoughts below. Because sometimes, the quietest stories need the loudest voices to be heard. I didn't reach out to her again after that day. Not because I didn't want to, but because I realized that sometimes the hardest part of love is knowing we need to step back. I had to accept that the daughter I once knew was gone, that the space between us was now filled with something else, distance, silence, maybe even anger, and that was a pain I wasn't sure I'd ever fully heal from. I spent many nights after that sitting quietly, thinking about all the moments we shared, the birthdays, the school plays, the little things only a father and daughter understand, and I held on to the hope that one day, maybe, she'd remember those too, that she'd remember me. But until then, all I could do was carry the memory of that final meeting, her turning away from me, the last time I saw her face up close. The silence after that last meeting was deafening. It wasn't just the absence of words between us. It wasn't even the absence of her presence. It was something heavier. The kind of silence that fills a room and stretches through days and weeks. A silence so loud it drowns out every other sound. At first I thought it was a punishment, something I deserved. Maybe I had failed her in some way. Maybe I wasn't the father she needed anymore, and this was my consequence. I kept waiting. Waiting for my phone to ring, waiting for her to call, waiting for her to say she was sorry, or at least to explain, but the calls never came. The messages I sent were left unread, and the days stretched on, one after another, each quieter than the last. It's strange how absence can grow so heavy, not the absence of noise, but the absence of someone you thought you'd never lose. You get used to their voice, their presence, their place in your life, and then one day they're just gone. I kept telling myself she'd come back, that this was just a rough patch, a mistake she'd soon regret, but the truth crept in slowly. The person I was missing, the daughter I'd known and loved, she was gone long before the money disappeared. That realization landed like a stone in my chest, heavy, cold, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about the stolen money anymore. It was about a bond broken in silence, a trust lost somewhere. Here between us, in moments I hadn't noticed slipping away. I had to find a way to live with that. So I started small. I took up morning walks again, like I used to years ago when she was a little girl. The early hours, when the world feels quiet and still, gave me something to hold on to. The cool air, the soft rustling of leaves. It was calming, even when my mind raced with memories. I fixed things around the house. Small repairs that needed doing. The leaky faucet in the kitchen, the squeaky door hinges, the flickering light in the hallway. These tasks kept my hands busy, gave me purpose. They reminded me there was still work to do, still things to care for. I cooked dinner for one now. At first, it felt strange. The silence at the table, the empty chair across from me. But slowly, I learned to find comfort in that quiet. There's a quiet dignity in learning to be alone, especially when you never imagined you would have to. I'd still check my phone from time to time, not because I expected a message or a call, but because the habit was hard to break. Every time I saw that her name wasn't there, the sting was still there, but it was less sharp. The pain hadn't disappeared. It just softened around the edges. I started filling the quiet with small routines, small moments, like reading a book before bed, letting the words pull me away for a little while, or listening to the radio in the afternoon, letting the music fill the space. I learned that healing doesn't come all at once. It's a slow, uneven process. Some days are easier than others. Some days the memories feel like a warm blanket, something comforting, familiar. Other days, those same memories feel like a weight dragging me down. But gradually the silence began to feel less like a punishment. It became a space where I could breathe, where I could remember who I was without her. Not just a father betrayed, but I had a man still standing. If you're going through something similar, where the silence feels endless and the pain feels too much, please know you're not alone. Take things one day at a time. If this story resonates with you, please like, subscribe, and share your own thoughts in the comments. Sometimes just knowing someone else understands can be the first step toward healing. I won't pretend it was easy. There were mornings I woke up hoping it was all a bad dream. Nights when I lay awake, thinking about the daughter I once held close. But slowly, I started finding a new rhythm. I began to fill my days with small joys again. A cup of coffee on the porch, watching the world wake up. A walk in the park, breathing in the fresh air. A phone call with an old friend, a brief reminder that connection still exists. I began to realize that while the space she left was empty, it didn't have to define me. I was still here, still capable of feeling, still capable of living. And in that quiet space, I found something unexpected. A chance to rebuild myself, to remember the man I was before all of this happened. One afternoon, while fixing the back fence, I found myself thinking about how much time had passed, how much I had changed. The fence wasn't perfect. There were places where the wood was weathered, the nails a little loose, but it was holding together. And maybe, I thought, that was enough. Not everything has to be perfect to stand strong. I want you to know this story isn't just about loss, it's about what comes after, about finding a way to live, even when everything you counted on falls away. If you're listening and you're hurting, hold on to that hope. It's there, even if it feels distant right now. You might not see it today, maybe not even tomorrow, but it's there, in the quiet mornings, in the small moments, in the space where pain once ruled, new life can take root. And maybe one day, you'll find peace too. Thank you for listening, for sitting with me through this story, and for holding space for quiet healing. One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch watching the sun slowly dip behind the trees. The day had been long, but there was a stillness in that moment that made me pause. The sky was turning soft shades of orange and pink, the kind of light that seeps into your skin without you even noticing. It's the kind of light that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just be. I was alone, not just physically, sitting there in the quiet air, but in a way deeper than that. The kind of alone that fills your chest with both emptiness and clarity all at once. It's a silence that's so loud you can't ignore it, but it doesn't sting the way it once did. It feels different now. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her, not for a call, a message, or any sign that she might come back. For years, I held on to hope, however small, that maybe she'd change her mind. That the daughter I had known, the one who used to run into my arms after a bad day at school, might reach out again. But that hope, over time, softened and faded like the colors of the sky that evening. The pain was still there, yes, but it wasn't the raw, burning ache I felt in the beginning. No, it had softened, shifted. It had become a scar, a quiet, permanent reminder of what was lost, but also of what I had survived. I thought about the day I finally blocked her account from ever touching mine again. It was a simple act, almost mechanical. A few taps on my phone, a couple of confirmations. But to me, it felt like a small victory. More than that, it felt necessary. I had to stop feeling like a bank she could tap into whenever she pleased. That was the easy part, though. The harder part was learning how to stop letting her take up so much space in my mind. For years, my thoughts were crowded with questions and what-ifs. Where had I gone wrong? Could I have done more? Why did she choose to push me away like this? These questions spun around inside me like a storm that wouldn't settle. I'd lie awake at night turning them over, searching for some answer that might bring relief. But no matter how much I searched, there was no easy explanation. And now, those questions weren't the center of my world anymore. She had chosen her distance, and I had chosen my peace. That doesn't mean I stopped loving her. Not really. I still loved the daughter I once knew. The little girl with scraped knees and bright eyes who used to lean on me for everything. That love doesn't just disappear. It changes shape, like a river finding a new path around a rock. It bends and curves, but it's still there beneath the surface. Sometimes, the hardest truth we learn about love is that sometimes the best way to love someone is to let them go. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or giving up. It means accepting that not everything is meant to stay. Sometimes love means stepping back, making room for healing, even if that healing has to happen far apart. Sitting there on that porch, watching the last light fade, I realized I was no longer trapped by the silence between us. I wasn't held hostage by the empty space where she used to be. I was free, free to rebuild, free to remember who I was outside of the role I thought I'd have forever. I'm still a father, yes, but I'm also a man, learning to live in the quiet moments, learning to carry the memories without letting them weigh me down. Some nights, I still think of her, wonder how she's doing, where life has taken her, and I hope, quietly, softly, that maybe one day she finds her way back. But I don't wait for that anymore, because I've learned that sometimes the love that lasts isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet, steady, and full of grace. If you've ever felt the sting of loss, the ache of betrayal, or the loneliness of being left behind, please know you're. I guess what I'm trying to say is this. Sometimes life takes away the people we love in ways we never expect. Sometimes the hardest love is the one where you have to let go. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the story. There is still hope. There is still strength. And there is still the possibility of peace. So if you're listening now, feeling that same kind of silence, please don't give up. Hold on to the hope that healing is possible. And remember, you are not alone. Thank you once again for sitting here with me. May your own heart find the quiet grace to move forward, one day at a time. Time passed slowly, as it often does when you carry a weight inside your chest. At first, every day felt like I was walking through a fog, trying to find a way out, searching for some sign that things would go back to how they once were. But the truth settled in, quiet and unyielding. Not everything in life stays the way we want it to. The bonds we once believed unbreakable, the ties that felt like they could never fray, sometimes snap when you least expect it. The world you built with someone, your child, your family, can fracture in ways you never imagined possible. She made her choice. She stepped away, not just physically, but emotionally. And my waiting finally came to an end. I remember the days when I'd wake up, heart full of hope, reaching for my phone, willing it to ring, to light up with a message from her. I clung to the memories, her laughter, the little moments when she used to lean on me, the soft times when she needed me most. Those memories were all I had, and I held on to them like a lifeline. But as the weeks turned to months, the absence grew heavier, and I realized something I wasn't ready to admit before. The person I was missing wasn't just away. She was gone, long before the money vanished from my account, long before the silence settled between us. That realization hit me harder than I thought it would. It wasn't just about the betrayal of money or broken promises. It was about a bond quietly unraveling, a love slowly slipping through my fingers without any fight left to hold it back. And in that silence, I found myself changed. I became a man learning to hold his pain gently, to care for himself again after years of pouring out all he had for someone else. The absence that once felt like punishment became a strange kind of freedom. Painful, yes, but freeing in its own way. Today I can say with a quiet certainty that I have truly let go. The girl who was my whole world, the little girl with scraped knees and shining eyes who once looked at me like I was her safe place, she now lives only in my memories. That love doesn't disappear. It doesn't vanish just because the person who once needed you has walked away. Love changes shape. It becomes something quieter, something patient. Sometimes it waits in the distance, soft and still, like a river that bends and flows around the obstacles in its path. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean giving up or erasing what once was. It means accepting that some relationships don't follow the path we imagined. Sometimes, love means walking away. Sometimes, it means saying goodbye without a word, without ceremony, without closure. And while the silence between us remains, thick and unyielding, it no longer holds me prisoner. I am still a father, yes. That part of me will never change, but I am also a man who has learned to live with his scars, to carry the memories of what was without letting them weigh me down or define who I am now. I have found peace in this quiet space. It's not the peace of forgetting or erasing the past, but the peace of acceptance. The peace that comes from knowing that sometimes the best way to love someone is to set them free, even if freedom means loving them from afar. If you are listening and you carry the sting of loss, the ache of being left behind, please know you are not alone. This story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever felt the quiet betrayal of distance in a relationship they thought would last forever. To anyone who has stared into the silence and wondered if they would ever find their way back to peace. Thank you for sitting here with me in this quiet moment. Thank you for sharing this part of my journey. May you find your own path to peace, whatever that looks like for you. And if I could leave you with one hope, it's this. Healing doesn't erase the past, but it allows us to move forward with grace. The love we hold in our hearts can change and grow, even when the people we love have chosen a different path. And in that change, we can find freedom. Thank you for listening.